not, please go ahead and have Steve teach us a little. He was VP and Chief Safety Officer at the Bristow Group, which is a provider of rotary and fixed wing aviation services for offshore transportation and search and rescue. He was a Senior Vice President for Safety for MV Transportation, which is the largest US provider of contracted passenger services, including paratransit, demand response, fixed route municipal transit, corporate airline shuttles, and school bus operations. While he was at MV Transportation, he established methods and metrics to support safety improvement in a culturally diverse operation that included 17,000 employees across 130 operating divisions. And then, in case you think he didn't have qualifications for all of this, he served as Vice President and Chief Safety Officer for JetBlue. At the time that Steve joined JetBlue, the airline had 13 aircraft and 1,200 employees. And 12 years later, it had 169 aircraft and 15,000 employees. And we know that Steve was central in shaping the culture and performance of JetBlue then, and legacy lasted till now. Steve has also worked at Delta Airlines when he started out, and he has his bachelor's degree in psychology from Drake University and a PhD in social psychology from the University of Texas, Austin. And just on a personal note, Steve and I both worked on the committee for Dr. Pete Russo, whom some of you should know. Steve also, I'm sorry, I left it out, John would know, you were also at NTSB at some point, right? Were you there when John was there?
Well, John became a member after I left her. I think we maybe overlapped a month or two, John, but we certainly worked together. That's how I met John. I was going to talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Right. So just a wonderful, wonderful career thus far, and we are so thrilled to have you. Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lubner. It's so good to see you and the others as well. We could have really summarized that introduction. Thank you for that. The way my wife does, which is you can't hold a job, can you? But it has been a fascinating and winding road over the last, I guess that's probably what, 5 years now. No, over the last 30 years, and I wanted to share some of that with the class today, just in the context of over the course of my career, really had an opportunity, and it's really been a privilege to work with extraordinary people, many of whom are on this call, and really have not just a ringside seat, be in the ring as we have developed SMS, initially in aviation, and then an opportunity to explore its evolution into other modes as well. And that's what I wanted to kind of talk about today is what that sort of looks like, things that found to be similar across modes, and some differences, and then some conversation about what makes SMS implementation challenging if we sort of all buy into the principles and the concepts. What is it that makes it hard to do? Because it isn't always easy. In fact, many times it's not easy, but with good reason. So I do have some slides, and I'll show them, but they're really just to hopefully stimulate a little bit of discussion, or a lot of discussion. I really want this to be more of a discussion, and I would encourage everybody to please just raise your hand or just jump in with questions as we go through, and we can take this anywhere that we want to go that interests you. So with that, let me just to kind of recap. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let me know if it comes up. Is it up yet?
No.
No, of course this isn't going to work. Let me see what I need to do here. Oh, share. There's a share button. Let's
Yeah.
try that. Okay. Do we have it?
It's
Okay.
yes.
Oh, okay, great. All right. So what I thought I'd do is initially here is presentation. Yeah. Just Dr. Ludmer just went through kind of my experiences, and I just want to share because some of these companies you may not be familiar with. Certainly Delta and JetBlue, I think everyone, and JetBlue in particular, operating out of JFK, everyone's well familiar with. MV Transportation, probably not so much. It is a surface transit company. They are actually the largest provider of paratransit services in the country. Those are the, sort of think in terms of the shorter buses that transport folks, a lot of folks with disabilities, a lot of elderly folks to doctor's appointments. And this was an industry that really exploded following the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in the I guess it was the 80s of last year, early 90s of last century. But it just absolutely took off, and it was a requirement for all municipalities basically to provide equal opportunity, equal access to transportation for folks with disabilities. So a very complex and large operation. And then of course Amtrak, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about Amtrak. I joined Amtrak 2 years ago. It has been a crazy ride, and obviously just before COVID. But again, share some of the similarities and differences with rail, as we've seen in aviation, and some of these other modes. Dr. Lover noted that I really started my career coming out of graduate school at the NTSB. I had been working on how pilots communicate and operate under stress. Looking at doing both simulator studies as well as examining CVR transcripts from actual accidents and trying to understand how we can, as an investigative group, make better use of transcripts and understanding the level of stress and how crews are performing. And that's where I met. That's where I met John. We were actually doing a study on commuter safety. Commuter airline safety, and we held a public hearing and panel that John participated in, and talking about maintenance practices and the differences between 121 operations and Part 135 operations in terms of maintenance. And the thing that I was struck most about John, and if you've worked with him at all, you'll know this more than any person in my professional career. And this is what I learned from him, the focus on the individual who's doing the work, the frontline employee, and how we set them up for success and how we set them up to fail. And that everything that we do needs to really come back to that how are we supporting those frontline employees? And I'll talk about culture a little bit later, but John, you were the first one really to expose me to that and challenges those folks face. So I carried that with me all the way through my career. So thank you for that. A pretty broad range. The thing that all these organizations really have in common is that they're very complex networks. They're large companies, complex networks. Some are within the U.S. and some are global, and that creates some significant challenges as we think about SMS implementation and how we drive safety culture improvement and safety performance improvement. Okay, let's go. Okay, so I kind of assume that most or all of you are familiar with SMS. I didn't plan to go into detailed description of what SMS is. I'm happy we can dive into that if it's helpful or if you'd like. But as we look at safety management systems, across modes, across companies, really the foundational elements, the pillars really are all the same. You've got safety policies, you've got safety risk management and the processes and practices that support that, safety assurance, your audits, your investigations, your reviews, everything that you do to ensure that that your risk management methods are working. And then you've got safety promotion, which is really, really critical. And it's the one we don't talk a whole lot about, but what I've learned is that, it's absolutely, absolutely critical to the success of your SMS. But that's the communication and the feeding back into the system, back to your employees, the cultural development, all the things that sort of brings everyone together under your SMS and kind of rowing the boat in the same direction. So all of those, the pillars are really the same across all the industries that I've worked in and the companies that I've worked with. The interesting thing is that sort of as you see it laid out, and whether at a high level or in terms of your SMS plan, in rail and in aviation both, you're required to have a safety management plan. We have one. Ours was first required by the FRA a year ago. We submitted ours, actually our first one, about 3 years ago on a voluntary basis. And so we've been kind of operating under an SMS or SMS and evolution over the last, we're under our 4th year now. But it was required under regulation last year. We were the first railroad to submit ours, and we've been operating. We've learned a lot in that time. But if you look at any system safety plan, again, it's very structured. It's laid out very nicely. It looks a lot like the marching band on the field there. Everybody's all lined up. Everybody's facing the same direction. You got a strong leader in front. Everybody's in tune, and everybody knows what the plan is. And looks really straightforward. And I'm going to say easy to implement, but it doesn't look hard. However, what does your SMS look like in action? When you're actually there, we'll see if this works. Gosh, I hope it does. Okay, come out of presentation mode. There we go. Sometimes this is what it feels like in action.
Steve, we can't hear it. I think if you go back to the beginning and you go back to your share screen, on the bottom corner, there's a button that says audio.
Okay.
So you'll have to rewind it as
okay.
well.
You know what? Honestly, I don't think the audio really matters.
Okay.
He's just saying, remain calm, all is well. And then it's just, it's a crowd.
Sorry.
That's all right. I'm trying to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But this is often what it feels like when you're, you have those days when you're implementing your SMS and it just feels like everything is out of control, or that you're not making progress, that folks aren't lined up. And that's often the case. We think about, programs like SMS as moving forward as sort of this one thing. And what you find is that there are different elements of your SMS that will move much, much faster than others. And so, you feel like you're making progress some days, and you realize that you are in some areas, but not in all. So what are the kinds of things that make SMS challenging to implement? So first of all, SMS is a journey. It is not a quick fix. And like I said, we've been on the journey at Amtrak now. We're into our 4th year, and we are seeing an improvement in some areas. We are plateauing in other areas, and we're seeing a level of variability in performance in some areas that we're really not improving, and we're trying to address those areas. But if you're an organization in crisis, SMS is absolutely the approach to take, but you are not going to do quick fixes through SMS. There are actions that you can take to sort of stop the bleeding and move forward. But SMS really is a long-term journey, and without a destination. I'll say candidly, there's a lack of subject matter experts around SMS. That's not so much the case in aviation, I think, and it's been a while since I've been there. It is sort of the accepted approach to safety management. But as you move into other industries, even Rotary, because a lot of Rotary is influenced, and I'll talk about this, influenced by oil and gas and manufacturing industries, but certainly in rail as well. There are not a lot of SMS subject matter experts. And a lot of the ones that are in those modes have only been in those modes and haven't experienced SMS in other modes. We as we look to establish our SMS, as we evaluate our SMS, we aren't looking at rail as a standard. We're looking at other industries as well. So identifying those experts and bringing them on board is really, really critical. So again, to students, you're studying this, I think the future is bright, and we're always looking for new ideas and folks that have a good understanding of what SMS is and again, can help support implementation. Competing safety management approaches. Okay, SMS, again, it's kind of accepted as the way to do this in aviation. That is not the case in other industries. They're high reliability industries. My time at Bristow, and let me talk a little bit about Bristow Helicopters. Again, a global company. Our primary mission was offshore helicopter transport for oil and gas workers, so flying them out to oil rigs. We also, by the way, were the UK search and rescue operation. So we were basically the UK's version of Coast Guard, but oil and gas transport. And a lot of the safety folks in that industry, again, come out of the manufacturing oil and gas industries, which are very much process safety proponents. I sort of use the analogy, when you're dealing with chemicals, controls are really critical, and more controls are better to a great extent. Doesn't work with humans. Humans are not chemicals, and they find their way around controls. And adding more controls doesn't necessarily improve safety. So different safety philosophies and safety management philosophies that can sort of take you in a different direction or sidetrack your efforts to implement SMS. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And this is really the critical one, the one that you sort of don't think about as you're, I think I wasn't sensitive to as you're learning how to implement SMS, is that SMS operates within a larger system of influence. Again, what is your regulator's approach to safety management, and is it aligned with the principles of SMS? FAA, FRA, FHA, all these regulators are very different in their approaches to safety management and enforcement. You have partners. Again, talk about oil and gas companies. Within rail, and I'll talk about this in terms of our network, but we have a host-tenant relationship on most of our network. The host is the railroad that owns the track, and the tenant is the one that sort of operates on the track with permission and under the rules of the host. And even in aviation alliances, and I remember when alliances first formed, I was at Delta, and we began to enter in our first set of alliances, and the question arose, well, we're going to put our passengers on that other airline. How do we ensure that other airline operates safely, and how can we assure our customers that they're going on to a safe airline? So the immediate answer is we'll go audit them, and that's fine if you've got one or two alliances, partners that or airlines that you're gonna partner with. But all of a sudden, within the span of a couple of years, we had 21 alliance partners. Well, that's 21 new audits you have to do 21 times. You're going to be audited. It just wasn't scalable. So we had to come up with a different approach, a different way of thinking about how we work together and ensure the mutual assurance that our operations were safe. And then customers, our customers have expectations. One of the interesting things about COVID, it has really transformed the way people think about, the traveling public thinks about safety. We used to talk about safety in the context of it's the absence of bad things happening. And as companies, you tend not to talk about safety because you want that to be sort of table stakes. You want that to be not just assumed by the customers and not something you really need to talk about. Well, with COVID now, all of a sudden, safety became front and center. people want to see cleaning going on. They want to see, masks on. They want to see, at least in the early days of COVID, that's shifted. But safety all of a sudden became a very visible thing. And again, how does that change the way you approach what you're doing and the implementation of your SMS? Customers also, again, can be companies as well, so business to business. And again, we talked about oil and gas companies and the expectations that they have for how you operate. So, and they are not always aligned with one another or with your company's values and systems. And I'm going to talk about these last two in more detail here, but then the other is limited span of control. I'll talk about our network and what we, basically have control over and what we do not have control over. And again, how that influences how we can implement SMS or hopefully nudge our partners and our host railroads to adopting SMS as well. Okay, so let me dive down just a little bit deeper. We talked about working within a larger system, and the challenge that that we faced at Bristow, that we faced certainly at Amtrak, and even across all modes, even the early days of aviation, is this harmonization of standards. Again, you've got regulators, you've got, not just your sort of transportation regulator, FAA or FRA, but you've got OSHA, you've got EPA, FDA. And, there are points at which, those regulatory requirements, those regulatory standards could potentially come into conflict. And a TSA, security and safety, regulations. I remember right after 9/11, when there was discussion about arming cockpit doors. And from a security standpoint, well, we had worked for years to try to metaphorically break down the door between the cockpit and the cabin, so that there was open communication between the flight crew and the in-flight crew. Now all of a sudden we're going to put up a door that's locked, and you don't have access to it, and it's fully secured. How does that change how we approach our management of safety, and yet ensure that that we have a secure flight as well? So fascinating conversations, and trying to reach that, again, that sort of that sweet spot between these objectives was really critical. Obviously you have your company policies, and those you hope are standard and uniformly enforced and applied across the company. But that, particularly as you look at larger companies, more complex companies, that can be challenging. Getting some feedback there, Z. We also, with regulators, at Bristow, for example, we operated in 6 different countries, 13 operating certificates, and the harmonization, for example, even between state regulations and the EU, for example, and the regulations that they imposed could be a challenge at times as well. So. Can get very complex very early on. I talked about alliances and partners. How do you decide whose standard you operate to? Because they aren't all the same. And again, I'll talk about Bristow, because this is the most complex that I've experienced in terms of trying to accommodate different levels of standards and lack of agreement among them. And then again, as I mentioned, the customers. So all of these standards and and expectations and requirements all influence how you operate and your company policies, and in many cases you have competing standards. So which do you operate to? So let me talk about Bristow, for example. I described a little bit what they do and who they are. Passenger offshore was primary mission, but also search and rescue, and we had a training academy as well. We operated in 9 countries, 13 operating certificates all around the world, different civil aviation authorities, and again, different requirements associated with that, not always harmonized. The real challenges are our customers, our major oil and gas companies. Every one of them had fairly large and influential safety departments, safety officers, all of whom had a very strong views on the minimum standards for safe operation. And literally, we would have a base, it could be in Nigeria, where we served multiple customers, Exxon, BP, Shell, and we would have the same crews and the same aircraft operating under completely different, not completely different, but more or less restrictive requirements based on who they were flying that day and where they were going. Again, and we had some pilots, for example, who met the minimum standard for experience and training for one customer who couldn't fly for another customer, even though they'd been flying the same aircraft out of the same locations for years. So again, can get very, very complex and very challenging early on, and your SMS has to be able to accommodate that and manage it. And what you very quickly realize is that you can't do everything from sort of a centralized. You have to have company policies, but the management, the day-to-day management and of the operation, you have to decentralize to a great extent and both empower and hold accountable local leadership and your local safety organizations to effectively manage both from a compliance and a safety of operations standpoint. Where it really impacted us, though, was with audits, because every one of those customers, every one of those regulators, wanted to continuously, and this is an industry that relies heavily on audits to ensure compliance and safety. And we would experience, I said, 400-500 audits, third-party audits a year, generating up to 2,000 findings a year. And it is really, really difficult to sort of absorb that volume of findings. These aren't all serious significant safety of flight sort of violations. It's just often it's violation of policy, because again, we're operating under different standards out of the same base, and just the confusion around how we have to operate. So really, really challenging and difficult to observe. This makes again, implementation of what is seemingly a simple SMS very, very difficult as you move into global operations and more complex operations. Let's talk about span of control for a second. I want to use Amtrak to describe. This was fascinating to me. I'm learning a lot about the rail industry, which is absolutely fascinating. So Amtrak operates in about 21,500 miles of track around the country. We own and maintain about 3% of that. We have a little bit up in the Northeast, basically the track between Washington and Boston, where we run our Acellas, our high-speed trains. There's a little arm that goes out in Massachusetts as well that we own. And then we have a little bit of track up in Michigan as well that we own and maintain. Other than that, we are operating on everyone else's other railroads' tracks, and they maintain it. With that, by the way, if you wonder why we don't do high speed everywhere, it's because that's all freight rail, and it is not built or capable of operations above a much lower speed. So that's why we don't have really fast trains between Chicago and St. Louis, for example. The tracks aren't built for it, but we operate across all the 21,000 plus miles of track, and we're responsible for safe operation on those. Again, even though we are limited in terms of certainly inspection and repair of those tracks, again, we operate in a system. We have to rely on our host railroads and the regulator to ensure that the tracks that we operate on safety. And I say we have to trust that, but it's trust but verify. So we do have a means built into our SMS for follow up to ensure that proper inspections are being done, and that we're comfortable that, and if there are issues, that they're being adequately addressed. We recently had issues out on the West Coast. The routes that run right along the coastline are in areas where you've got a lot of shifting terrain, sand, landslides, and all that, and that can obviously impact the geometry of the track. And so we actually just really had a great example of applying SMS in terms of sent a team out with the host railroad, put together a formal risk assessment, evaluated that risk, implemented some mitigations, some operating mitigations, operating at a lower speed, for example. And then in the meantime, put into place, brought in geo specialists to, evaluate the track of the terrain, and an ongoing measurement process, so that if the track did shift, we knew about it. And we were just last week able to start operating again at normal speed. But it was a good SMS approach to this particular risk. And what it was for us is a good sort of scoped trial that we're able now to apply at other places on our system. But again, any company, any large complex transportation or high reliability company has got to rely on partners, others outside, and the quality of their safety management approaches and their SMS as well. So the other thing I mentioned, that SMS is now required among railroads. We're all required to have a system safety plan. That also, let me step back. Much of our service is a partnership with state partners. So they buy the trains. It's obviously their tracks now that we operate on. But as the formal sort of operator, they are required under the regulation to have a system safety plan as well. Well, most of them didn't know the first thing about system safety plans. So that led to, with our 20 state partners, getting together with them, helping them to either develop their own system safety plan, which we would operate under, or our preference, just operate under our system safety plan. But that required them then to delegate authority and delegate responsibility to us. And again, we just went through that process with them. But it was actually a really good exercise, because it led to these discussions about, well, who is responsible for this? So if we see, track issues, we see issues with the equipment, are you responsible, or are we responsible? How do we decide, who ultimately needs to take the action? Those are discussions you usually have after an accident. But this kind of forced us into having these discussions in advance. So really constructive exercise, and I think a real step forward for the industry in terms of SMS. So span of control is a real issue, as well as we look at SMS implementation, what you have control over and what you don't. The other issue that we have with span of control in rail is that, again, these 21,000 plus miles of track, a lot of grade crossings. This is where you've got roads intersecting with rail. And again, very, very, very few of the grade crossings that our trains encounter are owned by us or managed by us. But if there's a car on the tracks, it doesn't know who owns the railroad. And so how do we develop our mitigation? How do we work with our host railroads to implement improvements in grade crossing? And this is a significant issue in the industry. There's 2,000 grade crossing accidents a year. And we have probably 3 a week. Where our trains are striking various vehicles. A couple have been fairly noteworthy. This is one that happened in Thackerville, Oklahoma, just I think last September. Come out of. Oh, here we go. This is a car carrier that's stuck on the tracks ahead. And you can see how the arms of the barriers there are. So you can see the level of force and impact here. This was a tough one. The truck was not occupied. So no injuries or fatalities there. We did have three customers who were injured in this one. One of the cars that flew off of the carrier struck one of the passenger cars. They were relatively minor injuries, fortunately. But there's very little an engineer can do in this circumstance. We can apply emergency braking, but it takes a long distance for a train to stop.
I have
and
a
we
question
operate.
about this one.
Go ahead.
So for this one, how come the truck driver didn't move? Did his truck just like
Yes.
stop working, or did he stall or something?
Yeah, great question. So this, I mentioned, is a low. This is a car carrier. It has a low clearance, and the grade here it was sufficient that it basically bottomed out on the track. And we see this with a fair amount with industrial vehicles. So those that have a low clearance, they don't understand what the grade is, and they end up bottoming out. That's why he was stuck there. Now he fortunately he realized that he got out of the cab when he realized he wasn't going to be able to move, and as I said, was not injured. But I'll talk in a minute about what should have happened here and what could have helped prevent this. Another one that's got a lot of this got a lot of media presence. I'm trying to advance the slide here. Yeah, this was in Los Angeles. Yeah, and there are these are relatively minor injuries, but there is some nothing to watch. Are you able to hear the audio now? Okay, so let me explain what happened here. So the plane did an emergency landing, ended up on the tracks. It's near an airport. Fortunately, right across the street from a police station. But obviously crashed there. The pilot is injured. Fortunately, not life-threatening injuries. Just banged up, pretty good. Could not get himself out of the cockpit. The police ran across from the station and were able to pull him out, but you'll see how close it was before the train came through. So literally a matter of about, I think about 20 seconds to be able to get him out. And again, fortunately, it could have been much worse. But he was very fortunate that he was literally across the street from law enforcement. Now, what was concerning about this is if you get nothing else from today's talk, please note this. Pretty much every public grade crossing will have a sign that looks something like this, and it has a number and it has a name of the crossing or a designator. So in this case, it's 1768224M. Okay, but that number, you can certainly call 911, and that's what most folks will do. But that number is a direct line to the railroad dispatcher. So whatever railroad owns this, in this case, you can see Union Pacific Railroad. This number will go right to the dispatch desk, and you say, there's a car on the tracks, or I'm stuck on the tracks, or whatever it might be at this location, and they will immediately stop any trains that might be in the area, because you don't know when trains are coming through, and you may not have time for law enforcement, other first responders to respond. So again, you go out and you drive around now, you'll start to see these signs. But please, we've been working really hard to try to get this into driver's education courses and other community outreach efforts to try to make people understand. You do nothing else. Do this. Call this number, because they'll stop any trains because you don't know when they're coming. As a passenger railroad, it's particularly problematic for us because grade crossings in general, because freight trains operate at maybe 30 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour top speed, but we'll operate 70, 90 in the Northeast corridor, 125 miles an hour, and so the train is coming much faster. So people who live in these communities, they're used to seeing slow freight trains come through, and if it happens to be the time of day where we're coming through at a much higher speed, They may take risks, or they may not be aware. You don't have the time you thought you're used to seeing with freight trains. So again, please know about these signs, tell your friends, tell your family. If you ever get caught on the tracks, this is the most important thing you can do, is call them. Okay, but again, wide variety of protections at grade crossings, everything from just passive cross buck all the way through to the very sophisticated lighted and audible alerting crossings as well. And again, it is the host railroad working in combination with state and local authorities to decide what the appropriate level of protection is for grade crossings. We have very, very minimal control over that, except on the tracks that we own and maintain. And so, but again, we've had about 700 strikes, I think, over the last 5 years. We actually just did a data analysis around that. The vast majority of them, obviously, not on our tracks, but it impacts our employees, it impacts our customers, and the human tragedy is just terrible. Okay, so what is the common element across all these modes, all of these companies, all of these types of operations? It's pretty straightforward. It's the human, and the question I get asked more than any, with my experience is, what are the differences between aviation and rail and helicopters, and and I can talk to that, but the one thing that is absolutely the same across all of them is the human. Their attitudes, their motivations, their fears, all of that is exactly the same. I have not encountered any human factors issue, aside from the technology is very, very different, obviously. But when it comes to the human beings, I've not encountered a single issue or item of concern at Amtrak that I hadn't seen in commercial aviation, in helicopters, in bus transport. It's all the same. And so, that speaks to the importance then of culture. And when I joined when I joined Amtrak a little over 2 years ago, they had just come off their strongest safety performance year in the company's history. Again, they were in year 2 of implementing their SMS, had made great progress, very proud of where they were, and appropriately so, feeling pretty good about things. Day 4 of my time there, we had an employee die in an accident in one of the warehouses. It was crushed by a traction motor that fell on him. And then 4 days later, we had an employee who had just gotten off work, crossing the tracks to go to his car, struck by a train. This is somebody who's been working around trains for 25 years, and he gets hit by a train. And then 2 weeks later, we had one of our electricians in the Northeast Corridor working to replace a fuse in the Cadden area there, who was electrocuted and died. So in my first 3 weeks there, we'd lost 3 employees. And it was really gut-wrenching for the company. Realized that all this progress we had made in implementing an SMS, putting in place policy, process, programs to drive the safety improvement, we had not moved the culture as much as we thought we had. And there was too much tolerance for risk. There was complacency around activities. And what is particularly challenging in rail is there are too many single points of failure that can lead to really bad outcomes. So procedural compliance is really, really important, because variability can result in really, really bad outcomes. So for the last 2 years, we have invested heavily in moving the culture, engaging with our employees, driving standardization, and then having robust safety assurance processes to make sure we're doing it the same way. We have a long way to go. We still see way too much risk tolerance out there. But it's just really, really important that we recognize that SMS, again, as a structure is very, very strong. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the people. And, have they bought into where you're going? Do they support the changes that you're making? Are they afraid to report safety concerns? All of those questions are really, really important to answer, and to know where your employees are on that journey with you. So what are the keys to effective safety management? I would say being an effective safety leader, from my experience anyway. First and foremost, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are. Okay, particularly as you get into highly technical areas, you can't be an expert in everything, but you have experts out there, and don't be afraid to be the stupidest person in the room. Absolutely, really critical. I've been really fortunate in that regard, and again, many of them are on the phone or on the call with us today. Then you need to empower those people to make a difference. And you'll see this a lot if you read about what makes high reliability organizations effective, is that you find the expertise where it is and you empower them to drive the improvement. Everything can't be top down. So your folks on the front line, again, usually are the ones who know where the risks are and the concerns, and they're the ones who often have the solution. So you need to empower them to make the changes that are needed. Assume fallibility and failure. Okay, we are all human. We are all going to make mistakes. If you set up a system that requires everyone to perform flawlessly, I guarantee you, you won't be successful. So that it has to be incorporated in everything you do. What happens when somebody makes a mistake? What happens when somebody makes a bad decision? Ensuring that you've got stopgap controls that doesn't result in really bad outcomes. You need to over communicate. Actually, you can't over communicate. More and more communication, the better. Make sure everybody is on the journey with you. Everybody understands where you're going, and is with you. And really, really important, listen. Again, if you come in thinking you're the expert, that you've got to figure out, I've studied SMS, I know how to implement this, then again, your path is going to be very, very difficult. There is SMS as a plan, and then there's SMS as it in action. SMS is how it works in your organization, and they can be very, very different. You have to adjust your plan. There's a Mike Tyson's quote, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the nose. It really applies here. And remain curious. Again, I would say the thing that has helped me more than anything is I'm fascinated by the different industries that I've had an opportunity to work in. And I get bored really easily. So you can find a lot of you think aviation is absolutely the way you want to go. That's great, and hopefully you'll have a long and wonderful history there, or career there. But remain open, remain curious to possibilities, and know that your skills and the knowledge that you're developing here are transferable. Okay, you may start in one mode and end up in another. You may start in one industry, completely different other one, but don't limit your possibilities. Again, you as a you're coming out of college and entering, those of you entering into the workforce at a better time than I think any of us have ever seen in long time in our country's history. So your options, your opportunities are boundless, and don't limit yourself to just thinking that I can do this thing. So let me pause there. That's a lot. I've been talking for a long time. Let me open it up for questions. I do want to talk a little bit, and I was going to say maybe trains. I do want to talk a little bit about Amtrak and the possibilities there, because I know you all are kind of sort of focused on aviation. But again, the skills that you're developing, the knowledge are very, very transferable. And now there's never been a better time to look. I'm very, very excited about the future. Just to give you a sense, with the passage of the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act last fall, we're looking at a $66 billion investment in passenger rail over the next 5 years. We're coming from a point where we were cutting back because of COVID. We had dropped our passengers had dropped 97% at the height of COVID, to a point where we have to figure out how to invest $66 billion over the next 5 years. And we are looking for expertise and technical talent in pretty much every area, including safety and security. So the future is very, very bright, but in many ways, this is as daunting as periods where you're cutting and you're having to reduce your spend and all that. It's a huge mountain for us to climb. So again, looking at options, consider Amtrak. And I've got other information that, I'll share with you here in a minute. But let me pause there and just open it up to questions.
Can I just stop the share so that you can see all?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, we have one question that came in the chat. What's the biggest or most common?
I wrote it. My fault.
Okay, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, it's a general question, but anybody can answer it. But in any field that you've seen when it came to safety, what's the biggest or common contributor to errors or factors you've seen? If it's outside sources, either lack of knowledge of the technology that they're using or the vehicle that they're operating, like what's the biggest contributor you've seen?
That's a great question. It's hard for me to narrow down because you see all of those things. I would say communication. Just because I think that everything that we do involves some element of communication, and it's really easy to miscommunicate, particularly under stress. So I would say whether it's incomplete communication, we're very structured in aviation around use of checklists and ensuring that the right information is communicated at the right time and it's acknowledged and received and implemented. Other modes, not so much in rail in particular. This is one we're really focused on right now. We don't have the same checklist methodology or same checklist philosophy. Our communications, there are requirements for proper communications, but I would say that our communications are much more variable, and where we see problems, a lot of it is around communications.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead, Boyuan.
Oh, hi, this is Boyan. Actually, I have like a small curious questions because we saw some video the rail got crashed with a civilian vehicles or aircraft. So I'm wondering, is there kind of a possibility we can set the weight ratio sensors? When the car, or the other object stay in the intersection for certain amount of seconds, and the dispatcher will knows.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's some of what we're looking at now. Here's the challenge with grade crossings right now is that, like I said, there's 2,000 a year, but those 2,000 are divided across 49 states. I don't know, countless counties within that. And I'm going to come, where I'm going with this is funding and who decides what improvements are made. They're distributed across 8 railroads, largely, and transit companies. The point is this: as I mentioned, we've seen 700 over the last 5 years because we operate on a national network. But any one railroad might see one every 2 or 3 weeks, or 1 or 2 a month, or whatever it might be. Certainly a community or a county does not see that many. The ones they do see are impactful because it's usually folks that live in the community, their families and that, they're impacted. But it's a big problem that is distributed across a lot of different folks who are responsible. And so there's no one overarching strategy for fixing this. One of the things that we're trying to drive is to get the FRA to really step up and take a leadership role. Let's collect the data across the system. Let's understand what technologies like you're describing work. And then who pays for implementing those technologies? We know that there are good solutions out there. There's just no strategy for deciding here are the steps we're going to take to reduce these, because the problem is distributed, so widely across the country. And the funding for those. Now, one of the things that's changed with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act I just mentioned is that there's a lot of dedicated funding now to improving grade crossing safety. The ultimate fix is you want to remove grade crossings. You want to separate grades so that roads and trains aren't at a point where they can collide. That's real expensive, but ultimately that's solution. In the meantime, the technologies like you're talking about, where alerting systems, in advance. Other technologies is what we need to be looking at, and there's a lot of them out there. It's just nobody sort of has the reins in deciding this is the path we ought to go.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. If you have good ideas, we need them.
Technology challenged, a little challenged there.
There's a question in the chat, or go ahead, John.
I'm sitting here listening to you about the coming from aviation, going to the rails. And as a board member, I was the board member with the most aviation experience. So what did I get? Bourbonnais, Illinois, Fox River Grove, Illinois, Silver Spring. I get all the train crashes.
There you go.
I get Amtrak out of Kingman, Arizona. So I was always impressed and fascinated by the railroad side of it, and how much improvement they could make by paying attention to what we did in aviation.
Yeah.
But on the culture side, when I go into maintenance organizations, and sometimes with flight crews, but mostly with maintenance, one of the leave behinds that I have is I spend a couple of minutes just talking to them about they are their brother's keeper.
That's right.
When you see somebody that you work with doing something that they shouldn't be doing, you know, a little spin-off on that see something, say something, the thing we see on oftentimes, right? To
Yep.
Say something to them, or say something to the supervisor, but
Yep.
don't let it go unnoticed, because sooner or later it's going to have a bad outcome.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And that is not highly ingrained into the rail culture. And, you know, there's this legacy sort of attitude or view that, look, danger is part of what we do. And you know, that you know, you can't tell somebody else how to do the job. You know, everybody has their own technique. That's what I was talking about in terms of proceduralization, standardization, so that you know how the job's supposed to be done. If you see somebody who's not doing it that way, you can intervene. The problem is there's too much variability in how we approach these jobs, and then, you know, it's again, a simple mistake can really have catastrophic outcomes. But, you know, we just had an event the other day where we had folks in a bucket, a crane bucket, that were changing out some fuses, and or I'm sorry, removing some grounds, and we had two guys up in the bucket. Well, they put out the stabilizers, 7 people in the crew. They put out the stabilizers on one side, but not on the other side, and they ended up tipping over. Now, fortunately, there was a building right next to where they were doing this, and they ended up sort of getting dumped on top of the roof of the building. So minimal injury, almost none. But how do you have 7 folks, 6 of whom were qualified on that piece of equipment, allow them to operate without the stabilizers put out on both sides? It's just fundamental. And I know if I'm going up 25 feet in a bucket, I'm going to make sure the stabilizers are out, right? And yet it didn't happen, and nobody intervened. And nobody said, no, wait a minute, take a minute, put them out. That's, you know, that's the culture change that we need to drive. We see it in some areas, but so many we're not there yet. Folks, you know, I say people don't intervene for 2 reasons: fear or futility. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing on what we understand from our surveys is our employees are less concerned about the fear thing. That used to be part of the culture. You know, you raise a safety concern, and your manager didn't want to hear it, you get a bad assignment or you get punished in some way, right? That's, you know, there's a lot less of that now. But the futility issue, you know, when you raise a safety concern, is anybody going to address it? Is it going to result in any improvement? That's the part that we're really struggling with, not because it's not happening, but because we don't tell people we fixed it. We just assume they know that, yeah, we took their input and we fixed it. So we're doing a lot around the promotions piece and a lot around the feedback piece to say, yeah, hey, we heard you, thanks, and here's what we did as a result of that. But we have a long way to go on it, John, and it's very similar to the environment, and particularly in maintenance and on the aviation side, where a lot happens at night. Nobody knows about it unless, you know, somebody raises it. There's a lot of that still in this industry.
Okay, we have an audience question. Angelina, do you want to ask it or do you want me to ask it? Oh, I will go ahead. In your present safety position, how much travel is required? And what are the major capital improvements that are being made?
Yeah, so on the travel, this is shortly after I joined Amtrak, COVID hit, so a lot less than normal. I try to get out now, probably about 25% of my time, try to get out in the system in some form or fashion to just for me to learn and to get more familiar with our operation and our folks. But I think it's really important that you be out there and that you are engaged and you're meeting with folks and again, hearing what their concerns are. So it's rarely sort of flat 25%. You'll have some months where it's 50% or more, and then other months where I'm not traveling nearly as much. But it's really important that you do get out there and don't get stuck behind your desk. In terms of capital investment, it is across the board. We're in the process now of we'll be modernizing our entire fleet. In the Northeast Corridor, the bridges and tunnels that we operate on are over 100 years old. We have tunnels now that we're operating on Baltimore that were built during the Civil War and really haven't been significantly upgraded since. So we have major and mega projects around tunnels and bridges, replacing the catenary. It's all electrified in the Northeast Corridor. So, but all the infrastructure to support that, again, is all decades old. So we're replacing all that. We're looking at, we have a priority list of 35 new corridors that we want to open up. Those are routes, basically. If you look at our route map, it basically looks the same as it did, in the early 70s, late 60s. Well, our population has moved. We don't have no service to Las Vegas. We have no service to Phoenix. I mean, these major areas of population growth have very minimal train service or none at all. So we're looking at opening new corridors in those areas where people are moving to and serving them. So it's really across the board, all new fleets. We're going to be introducing the new Acellas next year. These are the high-speed 160-mile-an-hour trains. But we just placed a $8 billion order for new intercity trains. These are the slower trains, but that carry the bulk of our passengers from city to city. And then we're starting the process now of looking at replacing our entire long-distance fleet. These are the multi-day trips that we do across the country. So every part of our company is going to be modernized, improved, upgraded, and refreshed.
Sounds great. I'm waiting for Amtrak to become as pleasant to go on as the European trains have been for a while.
Yeah, it'll be nice to have some fresh new product and product that supports the needs. What we have seen, interestingly, 30% of our riders now are first time on Amtrak. Again, COVID, has once sort of sparked an attitude about journey and exploration. And a lot of people had on their bucket list, I want to ride the train someday. And again, so a lot of the folks that are riding today, we aren't seeing the business travel return because people aren't meeting physically. But we're seeing a lot of new customers that are trying Amtrak for the first time, and they're really enjoying it. Whether it's again, you can be productive. You've got Wi-Fi, and you can work while you're riding. You don't have to take off your shoes and empty out your liquids and a lot of the things that make air travel challenging at times. And even from a sustainability standpoint, if you taking the train, for example, in the Northeast Corridor from New York to Washington, you're going to contribute about 80% less greenhouse gases than if you were driving. So there's a real environmental sustainability benefit to rail as well.
Steve, I in teaching in Vaughan, I was commuting from Boston Friday morning down and Friday afternoon back. And after doing that for several years, I was forced to take the train. And I suddenly discovered that it was better than taking the airplane.
It's a nice way to go. It takes you from city center to city center. It's
Well, it was good for me because it's that corridor, and I get off in Providence instead of coming to Boston, because the Providence to Boston is painful
yeah.
on the train.
Yeah.
But Providence to New York, outside of the city, was really enjoyable. And like you said, I could get a drink, I could get a sandwich, and I could put the computer on, and I could get something done. And you know, no hassle going through, you know, no dumping your bag out, none of that. And so it was wonderful, and I really enjoyed it. So I think we will see some ridership come back, especially with new trains and new products.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for that feedback. We're real excited because again, we have an opportunity now really to connect with a whole new demographic of rider, and they've been really receptive to it. And again, it aligns very strongly with their their beliefs around sustainability and what mobility looks like for the future. So we're working really hard to design products that support that lifestyle.
Students, you have a great opportunity to ask someone that's been in every major mode, except maybe,
Except
well, no,
Marine.
Marine, I was just gonna say.
I have another question if I could ask.
Sure.
I can't really answer this, but in anybody's take when it comes to human errors in safety field, what is your take on improving it vastly? Because it seems like no matter what we do, we can't be really devoid of human error, but there's a lot of things we could do to, I guess, say, mitigate it. So what's your personal take on that?
Yeah, Brandon, I mean, that's the $6 billion question, right? Like, and the answer is this: look, we're not going to eliminate human error. I think, and we know a lot more than we used to know about what leads to errors, but there's 100 ways you can make an error. There's one way to do it right, and there's 1,000 ways to do it wrong. So we aren't going to eliminate human error. To understand why the errors are being made is really critical, and you learn that through investigations and audits. So is there no procedure? Is the procedure poorly understood? Is it the wrong procedure? Just and what's an error and what's an intentional? I'm not going to do it because it doesn't work. Just understanding, that's what our investigations should help us with. But really, the critical thing is to make sure that those errors don't result in really bad outcomes. So it's there's an element of preventing errors, which we work really hard to do in all forums. But then you also have to address, okay, let's assume somebody's going to make one. How do we make sure that that doesn't result in somebody getting hurt or property getting damaged or whatever it may be? So you really have to focus on both parts of it.
Okay,
But just it goes back to again, assume people are going to make a mistake.
Oh, okay. I have a question for John too. A quick question. Is there like a percentage difference when it comes to military pilots and regular commercial airline pilots when it comes to the human errors? Since they're more trained and they have more time to really go over their material since they're really used to it. Is there any difference in that field when it
Well,
comes to safety?
one thing, we're comparing apples to oranges, because the military mission, sometimes you have to go, you don't have to come back. But the commercial mission is different. But we have learned over time that the better trained the individual, the less likely he is to make a mistake. So from that point of view, the military pilots are in much better position than commercial pilots, because you and I have paid millions of dollars to train military pilots.
All right. I was just asking that because in that sense, it just shows that, training the pilot even more when it comes to the system and their mission would, I think, increase the chance of not for a human error not to occur. I didn't really know how to put that into words, but that's what I see.
Well, if you just take a look at the two crashes of the Boeing Max in Indonesia and Ethiopia, and and focus only with the pilot's involvement in those crashes, it's plain to see that their training played a role in what they did. You know, and I've been saying for a long time now, there's a reason why the US carriers and Ryanair and the European carriers had no problem with that airplane, but other people did. And I've seen no studies on the part of anybody that's out in the public to what the differences in training and what effect those may have had on the pilot's performance. So I think it's substantial.
Any other questions? Michael, you always have good questions. And we've been joined by Captain Dr. or Dr. Captain Pete Russo, who knows a little bit about the military and JetBlue and flying generally.
Hi.
Hey, Pete.
Hi, Loretta.
Hey, Pete.
Hi, Steve. How you doing? Good to see you again.
You as well.
I was just thinking about the trains because I'm actually located in Arizona. I'm waiting for the sun to come up over the side here. So
We're getting
it's a
there.
real torture
Be
for
there.
me. Yeah. So I also have experience with the railroads for a couple of years during college. And growing up in New York, of course, everybody was intimately connected to the subway, and I do mean intimately. So the you're all right. I was amazed that when you come outside of New York City, outside of the Northeast area, you find the infrastructure improves dramatically. It's like going to a different planet. And it led me to believe that, you know, in aviation, we fly over everything. So we don't really get to see all that stuff down there in the middle. But here, for instance, you know, it's a culture of doing everything to a certain standard that just won't, it's not in law, and it's just in custom. So if things are wrong, people will have a much more open way about talking about it, you know, because it's not part of the culture. You're not doing something that's appropriate for us. And so I think that's part of the education process. You know, in aviation, we spent many years, 50 years at least in my life, trying to infuse some of that cross-cultural communication. And the other thing is with Amtrak, you're really stuck with what you got on the surface. You operate on other people's track all the time. And so if you're whizzing along at your customary 100 miles an hour and suddenly you go from one state to another with the culture of keeping things apart and checking on things all the time is not so prevalent, you're really putting yourself at unexpected risk. How do you plan to deal with that? Is that part of your job?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly. And again, you know, we have to rely on the system to some extent. Again, it's not blind trust, but you know, we can't inspect every mile of the track, and there should be no reason to do that. There's a role the regulator plays as well around that. But look, it's in everybody's best interest for the tracks to be well maintained and for there to be no issues around that. But we you know, look, we're responsible for our operation. So if we have concerns or we're aware of risk, then we have a responsibility to ensure that it's being addressed and mitigated, certainly to an acceptable level. And you know, and that's not so much, you know, my concern. Where it becomes challenging in terms of, again, driving our SMS and the culture is not only are we operating on different railroads tracks and in their infrastructure, but when we are subject to their rules, and how our employees, for example, are dealt with if there's a violation. So under positive train control, for example, if they miss a speed restriction and PTC has to kick off and slow the train down or whatever. If it happens on this railroad, you know, might file a report, might be noted in that, but okay, that's fine. You know, one mistake, whatever. But a mile down the track on a, you know, now in another railroad's own track, they may be removed from service, and they could even be, you know, sort of decertified from operating for that on that railroad's tracks for exactly the same violation. And so we have to manage through that. That's, you know, again, that's going to take sort of an industry focus and alignment around that. But the rules change. Yeah, again, there are some quality differences, but by and large, you know, including Amtrak, you know, every railroad has their own strengths and weaknesses in terms of, you know, their approach to safety.
Steve, I was
Sort of
going
like flying from one country to another. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
you're exactly right. Yeah. You assume there's a minimum standard of safety that's observed, but then, you know, how far above that do you go, and it's variable.
Firstly, I just wanted to say welcome to Dr. Captain Pete Russo. We're really happy to have you here, even though it's very early for you. And I wanted to just ask Steve, following on from this question from Dr. Russo, can you talk a little bit about just culture and what that means so students understand, and then how you think it gets applied or created?
Yeah, so, you know, just culture, for those who, you know, who maybe not quite as familiar with the term, it's really, you know, it's your approach to when do you punish, when do you not punish? And it is both a philosophy and set of tools that support the fair and consistent treatment of employees. So, you know, the basic principles are: you don't punish mistakes, things that are honest mistakes. That, you know, punishment really doesn't get you to better performance. People don't know they're making a mistake. So those are opportunities for coaching and learning and education. Then you've got at-risk behaviors. That's where maybe they know what the procedure is or the rule is, and they deviate from that. But there is a perception that deviation isn't more risky. In fact, you know, they may do it for what they believe to be good reasons. You know, I'm gonna deviate this one time to get us back on time or whatever it is. But they view it as not more risky, or, you know, not less safe. Those are opportunities for counseling, and usually there's a, you know, discussion that goes with that, and, you know, don't do it again, and, you know, here's why it's important that you do it the right way, et cetera. So you've got coaching and learning, you've got counseling, and then for behaviors that are clear negligence, disregard for safety, you understand the potential consequences of what you're doing and that it could cause harm to yourself or other people. That's where you introduce punishment, and you take stronger action. The challenge in practice, I mean, it sounds, again, very, very straightforward, is coming to agreement and alignment around what falls into which category. When is it negligence or disregard for safety, and when is it just at-risk behavior? And where do you draw the line on that? What if somebody engages in at-risk behavior repeatedly? Is that now getting into negligence? So in practice, it becomes very challenging. As I said, there are tools out there that can help managers with that and help companies sort of evolve to that. But again, in practice, you know, there's history with employees. Managers want to take action because this person, you know, I don't like them. I don't like what they've done, you know, in other areas, whatever it might be. There's a lot of noise that sort of gets introduced into the practice of just culture. And so, you know, it's not something you sort of say, we're moving to just culture, here it is. Now don't punish these things and don't practice these things. You can't really, you know, introduce policy that gets you very far. You really have to train folks. You have to stay on top of it. You have to, again, ensure that you're consistently applying it across the organization. It's a long journey and it's a tough one. And we're there. I say we're on that journey where we've introduced it to our management, but we have not really cascaded it into the organization so that everybody understands, if I do this, I get, you know, coached and counseled. If I do this, you know, I'll probably get time off. And as I said, now when we operate in somebody else's tracks, their approach to it is what impacts our employees, not even ours. So for our employees, it becomes very confusing. Does that help?
Yeah, I think it's a hard concept. And then, of course, you know, how long does it take?
Absolutely, it takes years. And it's real easy to, you know, you have a couple of missteps that are high profile, and now you're back to square one. It's really about building trust over time, trust on management side, trust on the frontline employee side, as to I know how I'll be treated.
Do you have anything like ASAP, the Aviation Safety Action Program?
Oh, that's such a good question. We have in rail a similar program. It's actually similar to the ASRS program, the NASA program, where it's called Close Call Confidential Reporting, C3RS. And it is very similar to early days of NASA ASRS reporting in that the reports all go externally to the third-party vendor NASA. And at some point we get a summary report of what's going on. A lot of challenges with it right now, and we're working with the FRA to try to address some of these and could really use aviation's help because one, we don't yet have, we have voluntary reporting as a company, but we don't have an ASAP kind of program that also provides incentives against either company punishment or regulatory punishment. The information that we get back from NASA is often redacted to the point we really can't do anything with it. It doesn't tell us anything about where and when and how, importantly. There is no requirement that the reporter participate in an investigation or help us understand why it happened. None at all. So there's no incentive for them to answer questions about, well, how did you get distracted, or what was your sleep cycle, or anything along those lines. So a lot of a lot of work has to happen for it to be, and very few railroads participate in it. So we do. There's one other railroad that does, but beyond that, really not. So its ability to help us understand how the system operates is how safe the system is minimal. So it's one of the things that we've raised with the FRA and are trying to work with them around. We need to improve this program, or there's no reason to participate. It just didn't help us. We're working now, though, we just introduced a new internal voluntary reporting system, and the next step on that is to work with our unions to try to implement an Amtrak ASAP program.
I'm not sure that everybody knows what ASAP stands for. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. I'm sorry. So it's a terrible acronym. It's the
Aviation Safety
Action Program. Yeah, so it tells you nothing, right? So we mentioned that there's a program, the ASRS program, where pilots could report to NASA any violation up to including violations that again, mistakes that they make, so that we can learn from them. A few years into that program, American Airlines was the first airline to say, well, what would happen is NASA would send these large reports about what pilots are experiencing, what's happening, but an airline couldn't see which of those reports were, in their case, Americans. If we know what challenges and what mistakes our pilots are making, we can make the changes within American. So but we couldn't do that under ASRS. So they created a program working with their unions where pilots could report the same information internally and receive some incentives against any punishment or action by the company, the same way they wouldn't get action by the FAA. And so the company got the same information that NASA was getting, and the employees got protection against action against them. So and so that became an ASAP program. So ASAP programs are individual to the airline. Well, again, we're trying to do the same thing with Amtrak and in rail. We want our employees to step forward and say, hey, I made a mistake. I blew through a signal. Here's why, and be open and help us understand why these mistakes are happening. But they're afraid of action either by FRA or by the company.
That's great. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Oh, Oliver, go ahead.
I kind of have like a big question.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally want to know this as a passenger. I don't really use Amtrak, and this is one of my reasons is going to be, it's not very close to me. I think people have to go out of their way to get there, and it doesn't leave me exactly where I want to be, which is why I think people lead to third parties like Uber and Lyft or using their own car. And number two is I think the trains are just too slow. I think there's a lot of competition between us and China, which is very steep right now. And I really want to know, like, as a passenger, will we see our trains become to that level of where they are connected to where they might go from state to state across this country, from like Cali to Albany, or will they even get as fast as those other trains?
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. Huge question, and there's a lot to unpack there. But let me just say this. So
Yeah.
first, you're absolutely right. And by the way, we want you on board. So again, with this significant investment that we're seeing, we are hoping to open up a greater frequency and routes to new areas where people live that they didn't live 50 years ago, or you didn't see the volume of population there as you see now. So we are reworking our network, and with this investment, we'll be able to build new routes and increase service. As far as high speed, there are certain routes that are well suited for high speed. So think Dallas to Houston to San Antonio as one. But high speed isn't good for a lot of different routes, because here's the thing: they have to be between big population centers where people only want to go from this point to this point. They don't want to stop in between, because once you start stopping in between, you can't go high speed. You can't get up speed and slow down enough. So there are certain markets where that's possible, and I just mentioned one in Texas, and there's others sort of out to the west. They're real expensive to build and to maintain, but they're, again, where there's a market for it, we think we can do it. In the meantime, what we're doing is looking at more conventional travel, lower speed, but still, comfortable, good way to travel in other markets where we have to do more frequent stops. And you're absolutely right. Some people, when you got to get there fast, probably flying is a good way to do it. But when you want to work and you don't have to be there really, really quickly, a train is a really comfortable and great way to go. And for a lot of people, it's the journey that they want. And again, particularly long distance routes, people, they want to sit back, they want to relax, they want to see the country. And we're seeing a lot of those folks come to train now. So the point is, there's different products for different needs, and we're hoping to increase our service in all of those markets: the long distance, the inner city, and then the high speed.
Okay, we have one last question from Brandon, who is eager to work at Amtrak. No, I'm just kidding.
Great.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, you said something that boosted my interest. You said planes is the fastest way to travel. And I have this question regarding that. Since technology is improving at a fast rate, and Elon Musk has created the, reusable rocket, and he wanted to try to implement that to, go city to city. What do you think is going to happen with the SMS systems incorporated in the past? Do you think it's going to change due to a lot of the technological advancements that's happening in this age, or no?
Well, I think, technology advances, we want to take advantage of them wherever we can. Again, either to eliminate hazards. So for example, positive train control now is required. Almost every train travels in a system now that has positive train control. So if they're overspeeding, the train automatically stops. Okay, that's a technology advancement that almost entirely eliminates an entire class of accidents. And we are constantly looking for where will those technology improvements help us. So, how we approach risk and how we mitigate it will hopefully evolve and improve with new technologies. The high mag, it's a lot of the technological modes that Musk and others are introducing. It'll be interesting to see where those go. Those are going to get really rich people from point A to point B really fast, but they're real expensive. So, that ticket is going to be, it's not, I don't think in the foreseeable future will we see that mode of transportation available to the large part of the population. It'll be, again, for a select few. But I think, again, there are corridors where we'll see higher speed rail, in the next couple of decades. But so I don't know if that answers your question, but technology is part of the solution. Yeah.
Steve, will you ever get to the speeds of like TVG?
Again, there may be some corridors where that's possible, John. And again, Texas, is a good example of one potentially. But you've got to have, broad expanses where people only want to go from point A to point B in order to get up to those speeds. And it's not on existing track. That's the whole point, is we gotta go through buying the land, going through all the environmental issues and all that to be able to build new, you have to build new track. And that takes a long time. It's real expensive.
Yeah, I've been watching the efforts in Florida between Miami and Orlando, and the Bright Line, and it's quite impressive what they've done so far. And they have done the track. So
yeah, they have. They're not up to those kind of speeds, but and by the way, they're having a significant issue with grade crossings. That's the issue there, is that you cross a lot of roads to get there.
They've had a lot of accidents, so they've slowed down the implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, they just had a big summit down there for exactly that reason. Hey, before I do break off, and Dr. Lubner, if I could, I'll connect with you around information on opportunities ahead. I just want to say Amtrak has both a robust co-op and intern program. We offer tuition scholarships as well. And we're just kicking off now a series of rotational positions for folks just coming out of school, where you, for example, come into safety and security, and you'll spend 2 years rotating through various aspects and come out of it, ready to take on a higher level management role, in that area or others in the company. So investing a tremendous amount in bringing new talent in. The benefits are great. And I would just, again, strongly encourage you to consider, not just rail, but, you all are developing and acquiring skills that are highly transferable, and you're in high demand across all areas. So we look forward to welcoming you on board the trains or on board the company, either one.
Thank you so much. That's really, excuse me, that's really wonderful to hear of the career opportunities. And I think your advice about transferable skills is very important for this and all the others. So really appreciate your coming.
We have one final question.
Oh, yes, I see.
Michael?
Yes, hi. I don't know if you receive state subsidies, but regarding federal subsidies, how do you think Amtrak would change if they stop receiving those?
Yeah, we would almost have to eliminate everything except the Northeast Corridor. So the reason that we run a lot of our state-supported services, and certainly our long distance, we make no money on those. Again, it just, we don't have the volume of ridership or frequency to be profitable. So those operations are largely subsidized by the federal government. States need the transportation. They want their communities connected, so they'll subsidize that. The only part of our operation that we are profitable on is the Northeast Corridor. So that would be the implication.
And have you thought about going underground, as Elon Musk's Hyperloop idea would do?
Yeah, our focus right now is on, again, we're watching that, and as technology advances and becomes more affordable, we might consider going in that direction. Our goal right now is to increase passenger service on rail overall. And if we can put, so the question is, do we broadly expand service 20 years from now, 30 years from now with these new technologies? Or do we introduce significantly more service in the next 10 years that gets more people on the rail, out of cars, is better for the environment, and serves communities with more conventional rail? And that's the path that we're on right now. We're doing both, but we do more upfront investing around getting people onto the rail now, because we think, given what we're seeing with climate change and just, again, increasing the need to increase mobility in the country as a whole, that we can do some incremental improvements in our more conventional service that'll get more people on the rail.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Well,
We could keep you here all day. It's really fascinating.
Unfortunately, I've got other meetings, but I really enjoyed this. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Really, and wonderful to see such a wonderful turnout, great questions. Thank you, students. Thank
Absolutely.
you, faculty.
It was great to see you again, Steve.
You as well. I look forward to more of this. That'd be great.
Yeah, I take Amtrak to Boston and Washington, so if you're ever on those lines.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I hope we're giving you a good experience. If we aren't, let me know. Yeah.
I will. I've got your email now. It's been great.
All right.
Awesome. Good.
Okay,
Thank you so
Thank you all.
much.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.